Hi there everyone, I hope I find you well. It's great to have you back. Good to see you again. And today we're going to be having a box opening review on a product that's been sent over from Hornby very kindly. But also I want to do a comparison with an earlier version of this model too. And I think that might be quite enlightening. So without further ado, come with me and we'll take a closer look. Well, this is the coach that Hornby has sent over, and it's the newest version of the London and North Eastern Railway Gresleys full brake. And the reason I was really interested to look at this is basically just to see how well the tempo printing of the Teak effect holds up. Because over the years, it's been in production now on and off for a good few years. And when it first came out, these coaches just really blew the modelling world away. Hornby upped the bar, and their tempo printing process for the Teak effect was just so much in advance of what had gone before that these really were the benchmark at the time for super detailed coaches. So I'm really interested to see, does the newest release hold up to that original release? But first of all, we're going to open this up and let's just take a look and get our first impressions of the coach. We've got a catalogue number on there, R4830, and Hornby don't tend to use A and B suffixes to denote a New Year's production run of the same model. Rather, they tend to give it a completely different catalogue number. So it's quite hard to know for certain without going and looking it up just how many times they've issued this full brake. But I bought one when they very first came out. So luckily, I've got this for comparison, and this is one of the very first release that came out, and to be honest, it blew me away. I was stood in Durham trains of Stanley, I saw this, and I wasn't really a London and North Eastern Railway modeller, but once you saw this, you thought, actually, I think I'm going to be, and I wasn't disappointed. So let's get into this one. It's a pretty standard Hornby box, and I find them quite easy to get in. They're not too tight, so it slides out quite readily. And inside the packaging, one thing I can show you is they come with these alternative couplings, and these are close coupling between the coaches. And it's actually really good. They fit into the NEM pockets and they work really, really well. So much so that my London and North Eastern Railway coaches run in fixed rakes using these. So you can see on this coach, because it's the end of the rake, I've left the ordinary coupling on one end, but there's the coupling in place, and they work really, really well. So pretty easy to get into. Just going to lift this out and place that down there whilst we put the packaging all to one side. First impressions are really, really good. I've always loved, since that first day that I saw these Teak coaches, the finish that Hornby have achieved. Now, I know that they went through a patch where people complained that maybe there weren't as many passes of the tempo printing, but it really does look to me like they have addressed that, and these coaches, they're back to at least the standard of the very beginning, if not better. So I'm looking here, we have really good representation of the wood grain in there, and it works so well. I believe that this is done by having multiple tempo printing passes with a different wood grain effect on each of the tempo printing blocks, and they build up to give this very accurate representation of real wood grain. Now, I know that later on Hornby kind of maybe cut back on the number of tempo printing passes and did draw a little bit of criticism, but with this, I'm not seeing any evidence of cutbacks. It really does look like you're getting that quality that the not insignificant price of these would have you expect. I think that even though it is an expensive coach, it offers the value for money, because there is no way that you're going to be able to easily get this kind of an effect yourself without being a very, very skilled model maker and taking a lot of time over it. The reason I asked for the full break is because really this shows off the wood grain effect to the best. It's got this larger expanse, and I guess that if any of the coaches is going to show up deficiencies, this has more acreage of wood panelling to actually show that. But I'm not seeing any real issues with the wood grain, and it does look like this coach is made from different pieces of wood. Now, when we reviewed one of the sort of mid-range releases, which I've got here, I don't have a full break in this particular release batch, but one of the things that we rather noticed with this was that the wood grain, it's almost like it's fashioned from one huge piece, and it did draw criticism from me when I reviewed this a number of years ago. But this coach, you can see that Hornby have addressed those concerns, and it's good to see a model manufacturer listening to the criticism, taking it on board, and actually doing something about it. So, out with the old and in with the new. And this is a coach that I would be quite happy to go out there and buy more. I do have quite a sizable rake of these from the initial batch, and looking at this, I would have no qualms in adding to that, because I've got every faith that the quality is there. The actual finish, if we move away from the wood grain, we've got the lining, which is straight and true. There's no bleed over. It looks nice and crisp. We've got fairly limited lettering, but that's just the same as per the prototype. So the LNER, again, it's multiple passes of the tempo printing to build up this kind of multi-layer effect with the lettering, just as the real ones were. These would have been hand-painted by a sign writer, and they took a great deal of pride in the manufacture and the finish of the full-sized original versions of these coaches, and it does look like the miniature masterpiece makers at Hornby have given their all to this in much the same way that the sign writers of the 1920s and 1930s would have put pride into this model. In terms of other things, I'm just looking on the end there. Again, we've got pretty nice wood grain effect. There is some lettering on there. Again, it's pretty nice and sharp. So everything is where it should be. So one of the things that my eye is actually drawn to, and this just really shows the attention to detail that Hornby have gone to the newer release of this. So if we look at the first release, where it says guard, or at least where it should say guard, the D is missing, because it's been placed right where the door handle is. And if I turn it over, it's got exactly the same problem. So it's not a guard, it's a gar. But if we then go to the newer release, the actual location of the word has been moved up ever so slightly. And now we get the full word guard. And believe me, it's one of those things that once you've seen that missing D, you can't unsee it. But it's just good to see that this kind of level of thought has gone into this model. The roof is finished in this sort of slightly off-white, which is actually, it's probably the best colour to do it. If it was a glaring, glossy white, I think in model form that wouldn't quite look right. So this kind of slightly matte off-white works really, really well. And I think Hornby can only be applauded for that. Now, I'm going to draw comparison now with the original first release of this. I mean, I've reviewed these coaches in the past, and the actual basic model itself has never been deficient since they were introduced. The actual injection moulding is sharp, the assembly is slick, and everything where it should be. Everything is pretty well attached. The bogies and the close coupling mechanism everything is working as it should. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much. If you want a really full review of the kind of the nitty-gritty of how these coaches are put together and the build quality, then do go and check out my other review. But in this, I'm really interested to do a side-by-side comparison to see, does it stand up to that first release? And actually, I'm looking there, and I think Hornby have gone above and beyond. I'm surprised actually at this. Well, maybe I'm not surprised. I know Hornby have really been upping their game. But when you compare these two coaches, there's a much more high gloss finish, almost like a well varnished finish on the newer version. I'm looking at that and it's got this kind of lovely sheen to it that the older version is lacking. That's not to detract from the older version. They got the tempo printing of the Teak just right, and you know, it really stood out for its time and still stands out. But actually looking at this, I think they've really gone above and beyond on the finish. I'm just having a close look there to see about the lettering. How does the lettering compare? I think the lettering, again, it's about the same, but there's extra lustre that they've added to this, almost like a kind of a clear coat layer, really does bring that out. I'm seeing the detail leap out more. I'm seeing the wood grain leap out more. It's showing it off. And, you know, I think Hornby are rightly proud of this effect that they've got, and it's nice to see it really leap out. Now, I'm just looking, yeah, those are the same way round, and I'm looking there, and the tempo printing is different between the two coaches. So Hornby could have quite easily reused the tempo printing blocks for this Teak effect from the previous versions, and I guess we wouldn't have thought any less of them for doing that. But when you compare these two, it's a different wood grain pattern, just as you would have found with the full-sized originals. They would have been made obviously from different pieces of wood with different grains, and Hornby has actually got that. You could run a full rake of these, all the different releases they've done, and each one is subtly different. I mean, that I've not seen that level of detail before between different reissues of the same coach. Yeah, I know they've got different running numbers, but there's much more going on here than that, and I'm actually really impressed. In terms of other detail, I'm looking at the rivet detail on the chassis. It's still reasonably crisp. I guess there's ever so slight fuzziness on the newer release. Maybe the moulds, they've got a bit of mileage under their belt, but it's not in a way that, for me, detracts from the model. I wouldn't let that count against it. Looking at the first release, though, one area I can see is that some of these handles, so for example there, it's got a kind of a brassy finish to it, and the same with that one there, which is lacking from the new one, and that is interesting. I'd have to look up on that, but it strikes me that maybe they should have been a brass finish. I'm not sure. But, you know, if I have to look really hard for a detraction, I guess that's one thing that I can point to. In terms of the roof colour, we're getting a bit of variety between the two. Just making sure that that one's not dirty. No, that is the right colour. So there is a little bit of variance in the roof colour, and you can see that the older release has got this slightly darker, almost grubbier look to it, which is a little bit odd in a way, but no, I guess there would be variance between coaches that had been in service for a while, that hadn't been in service for a while, but it's interesting actually. You could almost argue that that extra high gloss makes this look more like an ex-works coach, and maybe this is one that's spent a few weeks in traffic. So there is slight differences. They're not an identical copy of each other, but the new one for me is slightly better. Now, I showed you this briefly before, and I'm going to bring out again the sort of the middle of the range. It's not exactly the same livery, I have to say, as a proviso, but you can see the wood grain effect on this is much flatter. There appears to be less passes of the tampo printing, and you can see that wood grain sort of continues along the entire length of the coach, as if that's one huge piece of timber, which really wouldn't have been the case. People criticised Hornby, and Hornby took on board that criticism. So you can see we're back to as good, if not better, than the very first release. So all in all, what would I score these? I think this, when it turned up, yeah, I'd have probably given it a 9.5 out of 10. This, it clearly shows that steps backward had been taken. It's still a good model, but it's not good enough when we've seen this before, and I'd guess maybe a 7. And this, well, those door handles for me, I spotted them, and I'm thinking maybe they should have been slight brass effect. So I can't give it full marks, but it's certainly going to come close. For me, it pips this. If that was 9.5, I'm going to say 9.7 for this. It's slightly better than the very first release, and for me, that shows just how proud Hornby must be for this model, that they do not rest on their laurels, that they do keep pushing forward. So it has to be really, really commended. Would I buy these? Well, yes. I already have a huge rake of these. They're some of my favourite coaches, and looking at the new release, I think they're going to stay that way for a good long time to come. Well, I hope that's been really informative to you. A big thanks to Hornby for sending over this coach for review. And also, don't forget to tickle that like button and subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. And really importantly, don't forget to share this video too. Let other people know about what you've just seen. But until next time, you take really good care of yourself. And this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying thanks for watching. Bye for now. Today's video has been brought to you in part thanks to the generous donation of my fans on Patreon. And an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Bob Threeton, Alec Ralph, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, and oorail.co.uk. If you'd like to help support the show, head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk. Thank you. Today's video has been brought to you by my books, Bringing Home the Stars, Twinkle Little Star, and also you can get the complete comic collections of All Over the House, Books 1, Books 2, and also the wacky zany Life of Knobty Mouse. Thanks, and catch you later.